Good afternoon and welcome to another Mountain Musings. Today, we're enjoying a bit of warmer weather. We're headed towards spring. We're not there yet, but that's where we're headed. And so we're enjoying a little bit of warmer weather. It's still nice to have a cup of coffee out here. But this afternoon, we're going to look at this idea of hearing from the Lord in prayer. This is part of the spiritual disciplines. And one of the things that I want to look at is prayer, and in particular today, how we can hear from the Lord in prayer. In Isaiah chapter 65, verse 24, we read, "Before they call, I will answer. While they are yet speaking, I will hear." Isaiah 65, verse 24, English Standard Version. A long time ago, I was talking with a long-term missionary. He was a missionary in the Philippines, and he and I were chatting, and he asked me an interesting question. He said, "Matt, if you only had time to teach a new Christian one thing, either the idea of prayer and its role in our walk with the Lord, or how to read the Bible, which would you choose?" Well, I love reading. I always enjoyed it. And so immediately I replied, well, I would teach them how to read, how to study the Bible. And he said, well, that's not what I would do. I would teach them how to pray. Because if you teach them how to pray, teach them to talk to the Lord, to listen to Him, then He's going to lead them into everything that they need. And at the time, I was a little bit scandalized. What? Not teach them to read? Not teach them to study the Bible? But as time has passed, and I've thought about this more and more, I think he's right. After all, for about 2 millennia, the vast majority of Christians did not have a copy of the Bible. And yet, despite that, the Lord managed to forward His kingdom. He managed to shape His people all through prayer. People would pray, and He would somehow, in His own marvelous way, answer them. So I think, especially as a young man, I was mistaken. Prayer, talking to the Lord, and listening to them, listening to His words, listening to His will, is much more important than we realize. We exist in a time in which we are blessed with easy access to the Word. I have multiple copies of the Bible. I have digital copies that I use on a regular basis. I have no excuse not to read, no excuse not to look at the Word. But sometimes I wonder, do I avail myself of prayer enough? And that's what we're going to look at today. In the Gospel of Luke, we read, "In those days he went out to the mountain to pray, and all night he continued in prayer to God." Luke chapter 6, verse 12. And this is the passage in the Gospel account of Luke in which he comes back and he chooses his apostles. He chooses the 12 apostles. And it's interesting to note that right before he makes this very significant decision, he goes out and spends all night in prayer. And in fact, if we look at the gospel account, Jesus spends much of his time in prayer. Often it talks about how he went to a lonely place and prayed. He went out and spent all night in prayer. Even the night before his crucifixion, what does he do? He goes to the garden and prays. So prayer is this integral part of Christ's life in which he communes with his Father and receives strength, encouragement, and instruction. In John chapter 6, we read, "For I have come down from heaven not to do my will, but the will of him who sent me." And a little earlier, Jesus said to them, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me." So for Jesus, doing God's will was as important as eating. It was what he came to do. He came to do his will, and he understood God's will largely through the context of prayer. So you and I, facing life, armed with the same tools that Jesus was armed with, we should spend a lot of time in prayer listening to what the Lord has to say, waiting to hear from him. And this is a hard thing for us to do. In Psalm chapter 25, verses 4 and 5, we read, "Make me to know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Lead me in your truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. For you I wait all the day long." Psalm 24, verses 4 and 5. It's interesting. David, the great songwriter, writes about, and this is not the only place, writes about this idea of waiting on the Lord, waiting for the Lord to instruct him. And you and I, as Christians, need to follow in the footsteps of David, the prophets, Moses, Jesus, in listening to the Lord. And that's hard. I don't know about you, but even here in these beautiful surroundings, it's hard to hear from the Lord. And it's not that the Lord doesn't reach out to me. It's that I frequently don't listen. We we read a very interesting passage, and this will take a little bit of time for me to read, but I want to read the whole thing. And this is from the story of Elijah hearing from the Lord on the mountain. "And he said, 'Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord.' And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in a cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?'" 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 11 through 13. It's a very interesting story and very instructive, I believe, for us as we consider how to hear the Lord in prayer. You see, there was an earthquake, a strong wind, a fire, all these wild events, and the Lord wasn't in any of them. And Elijah waited. And eventually he heard a still small voice. Other translations render it a gentle whisper. And that's really where I want to camp for a little bit today. How often do you and I get alone and quiet? Our world is full of noise and hustle and bustle. Most of us have jobs that we have to go to. Even I, as a retired man, have a variety of responsibilities that I must deal with. We rarely have quiet in our lives. How often do we set aside time to pray and include in that prayer time just to listen, to sit, to be still, to meditate on the Lord and let him speak into our lives? That's a challenge for us. I'm totally a man of the 21st century. It is very rare for me not to have either music or the television going. Uh, I have to purposefully set aside time where I actually have quiet. Uh, Now, Christy, my wife, she likes quiet. Me, I have quiet. I feel like, oh, I need to say something to fill the space. But Christy is willing to sit and listen, to sit and be still. And it's not limited to sitting and be still to hear the Lord. Christy just enjoys peace and quiet. So sometimes I have to be careful because she may be just enjoying a little calm and a little peace, and I come in blah, 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 talking and very disruptive. But the point I'm getting at is, as creatures of habit, we need to build the habit of being quiet in prayer. Just sit and let our heart and our minds be still and wait on the Lord. One of the things that we can do to help in that quest is to make prayer more than just a time in which we lay our petitions, our desires, our needs, our wants in front of the Lord. We should make time to thank Him, to recall all the things that He has done for us, all the good that has come our way because of His action. That's an important part. Often, I have found in my own prayer life, I tend to go down the road of, oh, by the way, Lord, I want this, I want that, and oh, don't forget about this other thing that's important to me, instead of thanking Him for all that He has done for me in the past and in the present, and what I expect for Him to do for me in the future. I don't make much time for that, but I should. Here are some things that we can do to help us in our prayer life, to build in that quiet time in which we might expect the Lord to speak to us. Number one, turn off all our devices. Number two, find a place of solitude. Use a pen and paper to structure your prayer. One of the things that has helped me in recent years is I've started keeping a prayer journal, and part of my prayer journal is I structure my prayer. I build an outline that helps guide me through my prayer. And it's number four, take the time to make a list of the things that we are thankful for. When God answers our prayers, so we can be sure and say, hey, you answered my prayer, and I am grateful. Number five, ask the Lord to reveal His will to you. Ask Him to speak to you, and then be prepared to listen. And always remember, praying and listening should indicate a certain level of submission and admittance of need on our part. When I go before the Lord, I am admitting that I need Him. I can't do this alone. So, as we think about prayer, I'd like to start off with encouraging us, self included, to make our prayer more about hearing from the Lord than just an endless list of things that I want and things that I need. Take the time to listen. He's there speaking. We just don't hear. So I hope this has been helpful. I know that it helped me tremendously to sit down and kind of think through this, walk through putting this together. It helps me in my prayer life. As always, leave a comment, a suggestion, a like, or a dislike. If it is not useful, let me know. But whatever, give me some feedback. I hope this has been helpful. And as always, have a good day.